So before I take my leave of you all today so you can get back to the really important work you're doing, I wanted to just share a little bit with you about some of the sort of specific structures of nonviolent communication. So we're going to talk for a few minutes about what it is, why it's important, and how it informs the work that we do. All right, so the first thing to know, like I said, is that it's sort of a communication framework. It's a way of being in the world, if you will. So it's the practice, it's the structured practice of empathy. We talked a little bit earlier about empathy and why empathy, Paul was talking about why empathy is so important to the work that we do, because it's about understanding another person's experience and validating that experience, even if it's an experience that you yourself haven't had, right? So as a person, as a white person who does some anti-racism work in the world, one of the things that we talk a lot about is how do we hear and validate and affirm experiences of people of color that we white people have not had, right? That's sort of at the very root of being able to move through the world in an empathetic way, is being able to sort of understand, like I said, listen, hear those needs, hear those vulnerabilities underneath what someone is saying. So we're going to talk in a minute about specific needs, universal needs that we all share, and the ways, the different strategies that all different people go through to try to get those needs met. And communicating is one of those strategies. So, sorry this is so small. If you're an email person, I'm happy to email you these slides later on. But I'll just sort of read this to you since it's so tiny on the screen. And all of this came, by the way, from the Center for Nonviolent Communication, which is a nationwide center. There are outposts in many different cities, so if you're interested in learning more about nonviolent communication, I mean, I'm really scratching the surface here. I would encourage you to go online and try to find either the Center for Nonviolent Communication or the center in your own community that does this work, because a lot of times they do trainings and practice and things like that. So here we go. Nonviolent communication contains nothing new. It is based on historical principles of nonviolence, the natural state of compassion when no violence is present in the heart. NVC reminds us what we already instinctively know about how good it feels to authentically connect to another human being. So the reason I often start with a circle when we do this kind of work is because those circles connect us to each other. Those stories connect us to each other, right? Sharing about ourselves, learning about each other, and realizing the ways that we're the same and different, but connected to each other. With NVC, we learn to hear our own deeper needs and those of others. Through its emphasis on deep listening to ourselves as well as others, NVC helps us discover the depth of our own compassion. This language reveals the awareness that all human beings are only trying to honor universal values and needs every minute, every day. So here are some sort of tenets of nonviolent communication. Here are some things that when it's working well, when it's working the way it should be working, these types of things are what show up. So the first one is an ability to differentiate between observation and evaluation. So that means seeing something happen in the world and rather than immediately judging it, just trying to see it. Being able to carefully observe what is happening, free of evaluation, and to specify behaviors and conditions that are affecting us. Differentiating feeling from thinking. Being able to identify and express internal feeling states in a way that does not imply judgment, criticism, or blame. So that's like, rather than saying, you're making me angry, you say, I'm feeling angry right now, right? Rather than putting that blame on someone else, you can say, hey, I noticed that you did this thing, and when you did that thing, I felt angry about it. So that's expressing your own needs, your own feelings and vulnerabilities, as opposed to immediately drawing them out from someone else. Connecting with the universal human needs and values, things like sustenance, trust, understanding, inside of us, that are being met or not met in relation to what is happening and how we are feeling. And the last thing is requesting what we would like in a way that clearly and specifically states what we do want. And that is truly a request and not a demand. So the difference in life between a request and a demand, at least in the framework of nonviolent communication, is that in a request, the person has the ability to say no. So when you want to communicate something that results in a change of behavior from someone, that change has to feel voluntary to the other person, because otherwise you're just making a demand on them. And that's not a way of communicating that honors the other person's choices, respects their humanity, so on and so on and so on. So, okay, so here are some sort of big takeaways for nonviolent communication. The first is that it helps us take personal responsibility for our actions. So again, rather than saying, you're making me mad, you're pissing me off, you can say, hey, you know what, in this moment I'm feeling kind of angry, I'm feeling really pissed off right now, let me try to explain why I'm feeling that way. The second is that it recognizes that the choices we make, there are choices to make when we respond to other people, right? So one of the things that we used to talk about when I was working in the women's prison all the time is that nobody can make you feel any kind of way. Everything that comes out of your mouth is a choice that you're making. Now, they're not always the best choices. I mean, speaking personally, they're not always the best choices, right? But everything you say is a choice. There is a choice behind it. And then the last thing is to remember how to contribute to relationships that are based in cooperation and collaboration. And so what that means is that every time we enter into communication with someone, we want to do so in the spirit of cooperation and collaboration. So we're always trying to get somewhere better as a result of communicating with somebody, right? And one way to not get somewhere better is to say, you are making me angry right now. But a way to get somewhere better is to say, hey, I'm feeling angry right now. Can I explain what's underneath that anger? And then maybe you and I can figure out a way to work this out so that in the future, when we have an interaction around this particular thing, it doesn't result in me feeling angry immediately. I'll just share one kind of example of this in my own life. So my partner owns a bar, and she comes home from work very late at night, sometimes 5, 6 in the morning. And when she comes home at 5 or 6 in the morning, she's often very tired. She's been working for 12 hours on her feet. You know, she's exhausted. All she wants to do is come home and get into bed. And she has a unfortunate habit of leaving the front door unlocked sometimes when she comes home because she just forgets. And for me, and so what the first couple of times she did it, I just got filled with rage at her about it and communicated with her about it in a not, I would say, in a violent way perhaps, right? So things like, why are you not listening to me when I'm telling you to close the door? That kind of thing, right? Or don't you know that it freaks me out when you leave the door open? That kind of thing. That's how I was communicating about it at first. And then I had a smart therapist tell me that the reason I was feeling angry about that is because it was making me feel unsafe that the door was open. Because I have this trauma in my past, right, of having been assaulted by strangers. And so that trauma still informs a lot of the needs I have in the world. I have a need for safety. I have a need for security. When I'm in my own home, I want to feel safe. And when I wake up in the morning and the front door is wide open, I don't feel safe. And so the way that I was communicating about that need and that feeling was coming out as anger. When in fact, what was more useful and productive for me was to say, hey babe, I know that when you come home from work, you're so tired. And I've noticed that sometimes when you're really tired and you come home from work, you leave the front door open. And when the door is open when I wake up in the morning, I feel really unsafe. And so if it's possible in the future, could you try to leave yourself a little note by the door to lock it when you come home? And so that's an example of a way to communicate about that need that I was having, that need that was going unmet, that need for safety, where I got the result I wanted at the end, which is that she tried harder to remember to lock the door. We have not had any unlocked door problems recently. Thank you. But anyway, that's kind of a silly little example from my personal life, but that's a way to sort of explain how nonviolent communication works. So rather than doing what was my immediate impulse, which was just to get really mad at her and yell at her and make her feel bad, right, about it, I said, hey, I'm feeling unsafe in this situation. Let me try to explain why. Do you think in the future you could try a little harder to lock the door? And that seems to have worked. For now. So let's see. Okay, so it's 11:45, so we're going to run out of time in just a minute. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a couple of sheets here to just take with you We don't need to spend a long time looking at them today, but I thought it would be helpful to just see some of the universal needs in the world that we're all sort of trying to get met. And they're on the back of this sheet. It says needs inventory at the top. So this is just an example of some of those needs that I'm describing, things like safety, security, belonging. And then the other sheet is feelings. So on both sides, because we got lots of feelings in the world, both sides are examples of feelings. And those are ways that those needs get expressed, right? So sometimes feeling sad, feeling angry, feeling disappointed, feeling happy. All of those feelings are generated through needs. And then on the front of this page, it says how you can use the NVC process, and that we'll just walk through for a few minutes together. So why don't you take one of these and one of those.